Well, hello there. Happy Friday afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another live edition of Cannabis Chat. I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media, and every Friday afternoon we get together for a few hours of discussion about the latest issues in the world of cannabis. And joining me every Friday afternoon is our friend David Rabinovitz from Cannaventure. Hello, David. How are you today?
Great day, Jimmy. Good to be with you.
Glad that we are not outside in this 10-degree weather and below zero wind chill. And joining us is the new president of MassCann. His name is Grant Smith Ellis. Grant, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday afternoon.
Good to be with you, Jimmy. Thank you for having me again.
And you're a year older now, aren't you?
No, I stopped keeping track a few years ago, so.
Okay. Well, we won't wish you or sing to you a happy birthday again today, at least not until next year. How's that for a deal? Is that all right?
Sounds good.
Fair enough. All right. There's a major issue in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that has kind of dominated the discussion in the cannabis world over the last month and has finally come to a conclusion of sorts. And it has to do with the now controversial new delivery licenses and a subsequent lawsuit that happened by the Commonwealth Dispensary Association of Massachusetts. And David, you and Grant have been right in the middle of this since the very beginning. So why don't you guys take it away, kind of give our viewers a little background on how we came to this and where we are right now that that lawsuit has been dropped.
Sure. But Jimmy, let me correct something. I really haven't been in the middle of it. I've been near the periphery of the center. Grant has been dead center in the middle of it.
Fair enough.
As the guy who knows what's going on, which is why we have him in as our special guest host for today.
There you go. All right. So now that, but I will say this, you've been in on it closer, even though you've been on the periphery more than I have, because you were my go-to guy when it comes to things happening in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, because you have a great resource with Grant. So Grant, why don't you give us a little background on how we came to be where we are right now?
It went from me nodding in agreement with your compliment to David turning it into a compliment of me. Anyway, but yes, David does do an excellent job keeping track of this information. And for anyone who hasn't checked out Dig Boston, he wrote an excellent 6-part series about the road to home delivery. So his modesty betrays in some sense his unwillingness to talk about indeed how much he has followed this story from the perspective of getting the information out there to the public, which I think is a noble pursuit, and you should be proud of that, David. Where we're at in terms of the adult use delivery is folks have probably heard this discussion happen on this program before, but dating back for 3 years to when adult use cannabis was implemented in the Commonwealth, there was a plan to roll out delivery of that adult use cannabis. Medical cannabis is already being delivered in the state and has been for a year or two at this point. So that initial proposal in the fall of 2018 passed the Cannabis Control Commission 3-2. It would have created 2 different models for delivery, but it was delayed because the governor, the attorney general came in and asked the Cannabis Control Commission to put a little more time into their delivery rules. The governor and the treasurer, of course, are 2 of the 3 public officials that appoint the Cannabis Control Commission. So they each have an individual appointment to make up 3 of the 5 seats, and then the other 2 seats are appointed by the 3 of them together. So the point in all that is that the process to roll out these adult use delivery rules started right away back in 2018, but it took until the summer of 2020 for them to really get the process going and get around to deciding what the final regulations were going to look like. Now, 12 months before that, in the summer of 2019, they began thinking about rolling out adult use delivery, and they began doing it by creating a courier model. Now, this courier model looks a lot like Uber Eats, where you, as an equity delivery company, the licenses were only available to equity companies for 2 years at the time. As an equity company, you could own a fleet of cars, you could store it in your warehouse, but then you'd have to go to brick and mortar retailers, pick up orders and pay them retail price for it, and then you could deliver and get the delivery fee. And the reason ostensibly the commission approved that in the summer of 2018 or summer of 2019 was that, one, the commission thought it would be a low cost barrier to entry without realizing, of course, that it also meant giving up all the profits. And two, the commission said at the time, well, we're not ready to roll out another delivery license, but how about this? Micro businesses, which are cultivators up to 5,000 square feet, we'll give them a delivery endorsement. So they can now apply to deliver their own products directly. So that was the summer 2019. Now, summer 2020, all this information had come out over that 12 months because the courier license started to be available. So that meant equity companies were going to brick and mortar retailers and saying, I'd like to be a courier for you as a delivery company. What terms will you offer me? And what the retailers were saying in the spring of 2020 was, we want not only to keep all the profits on every sale, but if you want to deliver for even one of our locations, we want you to give us 9.9% of your company. Now, obviously, some equity delivery companies were, astounded by this. It was very predatory. And they went to the Cannabis Control Commission and said, clearly, what these retailers are doing is they want to have these equity delivery companies working as couriers for them for 2 years. And then they just want to open their own courier companies internally within their dispensary and get rid of the equity couriers. So you have to, if you could, commission, create a different model. So the commission heard what they were saying and said, all right, what if we created a model where you, as an equity delivery company, you could own a warehouse, you could own a vault, you could buy product at wholesale from cultivators and manufacturers, you can store it in the vault and then deliver it directly to consumers. And so they went ahead and created that. Throughout that whole time, the big brick and mortar dispensaries are fighting it, saying they're going to file a lawsuit if the commission goes forward with it. And on January 13th of this year, they did just that. They made good on their threat. And the lawsuit they filed was really, really bad. It was filed by the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, which is a group. It was a group of about 40 dispensaries on the January 13th when they filed the lawsuit. And the lawsuit said a few things, but one, it sought to invalidate the entire 3-year equity priority period for delivery licenses. It sought to invalidate the entire delivery operator license, and it sought to allow dispensaries right away to have courier delivery licenses. So there would be no need even for equity delivery couriers. Well, on January 19th or 20th, the story broke that the lawsuit had been filed. One day later, an organic boycott started. Myself, a few other people started sharing some posts. It was designed intentionally, the boycott of the CDA over the lawsuit, to not be run by any one group so no one could influence, peddle, and shut it down. Within 24 hours, 4 or 5 companies left the Commonwealth Dispensary Association in protest. Within 48 hours, they had lost another 5 companies, and including 2 of the biggest companies in the state, Netta and Sierra. And by Sunday night, they had lost 12 companies, which would have been about $150,000 in yearly dues that they lost in 3 days, and they withdrew the lawsuit. So that was Sunday night, just the beginning of this week. Roll over into Monday morning, and it comes out, even after the suit's dropped, from sources that talk is already going around about refusing to work with these delivery operator licenses now that the lawsuit has been dropped. So the boycott continues. There's going to be in-person pickets, I hear, by equity companies. And the whole insight about this whole structure is that retailers thought they could use our regulations and our laws to have a functional market monopoly and be the only ones doing adult use delivery. And equity companies stood up. The community stood up, a huge group of people stood up and said a fair market means more than dictating only you are allowed to do delivery, and they won.
That was a great synopsis of what's going on. What bothers me when I hear stories like that is I don't understand why. Actually, let me rephrase that. I am upset why these things happen. Infighting and greed seem to be dictating a lot of action inside the cannabis industry. This is such a young industry. It's so early, and we're already seeing infighting, and everybody's looking to grab as much cash or money or control or power as possible instead of working together. And isn't that what an association of people, of like-minded people, is supposed to do? Why is it strictly greed, Grant, that's driving this?
No, I think it's the a byproduct of the way American society has functioned for hundreds of years. I don't think it's any different than Standard Oil making shady contracts with railroads, which were a public utility, to undercut independent oil towns and consolidate control of refineries. I don't think it's any different than Tammany Hall or any number of other political sort of strong arm tactics, because they all, at the end of the day, while there's middlemen who get power and whatnot out of it, the fundamental goal of companies in the American Republic is regulatory capture. And so it's very realist political doctrine on their part. They view laws and regulations as an extension of their ability to profit, and they thus look towards those laws to stifle competition. It's been the Sherman Antitrust Act was passed in 1890, and we've had the same fight going on ever since. And sometimes we get lucky and a politician comes around who can speak their language and stop them from engaging in that malfeasance. But most of the time they get away with it because they're very good at what they do.
David?
I could see that look in your face. So Grant, where do things go from here, right? As it stands now, you guys did a phenomenal job. The CDA dropped their lawsuit. Then you ratcheted up a little bit more pressure, and Revolutionary Clinics dropped their lawsuit against the city of Cambridge. So as it stands right now, I think there's probably only one remaining piece of litigation, anti-social equity, that's going on. But the two big ones are gone. What's the next step? Is it just let's see how things unfold, or what are the concerns that you may have about bad actors or bad acts?
We talked a little bit about earlier, anti-competitive cabals threatening not to do business with delivery operators, but there are lists out there, and I'm sure we can post it somewhere in the comments or at some point, of companies. There are far more companies not in the CDA than in the CDA. So I think that's not as big of a worry. But just for the record, if anyone out there were thinking about trying to engage in an anti-competitive cabal, if you read 935 CMR 500-140 paragraph 17, you'll see that it says you cannot engage in that behavior, and the penalty is forfeiture of licenses. In any event, so that I don't know is so concerning. But what is concerning is, yes, okay, it's great that you talked about the lawsuit. For context, obviously we talked about the CDA anti-delivery lawsuit, but the Rev Clinics lawsuit was just as pernicious, in my opinion. They filed Rev Clinics as Revolutionary Clinics, a medical dispensary in Cambridge, in the summer of 2019. The city of Cambridge was thinking about creating an equity priority period for giving out host community agreements. And we talked in the past about how there's a bifurcated licensing system in the Commonwealth. So you before you can get a state level license, you have to get a local level license. Equity priority applies only for your state level license. So when you're going through the local process to get a cannabis license, there's no mandate that the city and towns take into consideration your equity status. But Cambridge wanted to do it anyway. So over the summer of 2019, they created and passed an ordinance in their city that would have created a 2-year priority period where only equity applicants could get adult use host community agreements in Cambridge. Revolutionary Clinics sued, claiming that that ordinance violated a section of state law, MGL 94G, Section 3, subsection A1I. And that section of the law says that medical dispensaries, cities and towns cannot use permitting ordinances to prevent medical dispensaries from co-locating as adult use dispensaries. So Rev Clinic sues, and in January of 2020, they get a ruling from Suffolk Superior Court Judge Kathleen, I forget her last name, but McCarthy, I think is the last name. But anyway, they get a ruling called an injunction, which basically prevented Cambridge from putting its equity priority period into effect. 4 months later, the city appealed under 231-118 to the single justice of the appeals court. And in April, there's this great ruling from Justice Dickoff of the appeals court, the single justice, saying that that word prevent would allow a city to delay conversion for up to 2 years for the period of an equity, for the purpose of an equity priority period. So then Rev goes back to the Superior Court in the summer of 2020, 6 months ago, and asks for another injunction. They get denied. Then in September of 2020, they go to the appeals court to appeal the denial of the second injunction, and they lose that as well. So they lost 3 times in a row in the case. But then a few days ago, CDA drops its suit. Rev Clinics, the suit had been ongoing, even though they had lost 3 times in a row, dropped its suit. But I tell that whole story because my point, Jimmy, there is great. The CDA lawsuits dropped. The Rev Clinics lawsuits dropped. But let's be frank. Rev Clinics in, I believe it was August of 2020, submitted a motion for summary judgment in the Cambridge case where they called the equity priority period racially discriminatory against non-equity owned medical companies. And in that way, that's the point I was making. It's a mentality. It's not a lawsuit. It's not any one action or public policy position. It's a mentality that has been displayed time and time and time again by some of these companies. Their profits are more important than equity, apparently, and also more important than a fair market. And so long as that's their mentality, I don't know what the path forward is other than to point out what they're doing to stop them from popping up like whack-a-mole at every single chance they get, undermining public policy and regulations. That's what I would say is the path forward.
I got a question about local politics and local politicians. You tell me who you think has the best intentions to do the right thing: local politicians, state politicians, or business people. And I'm not talking about specifics here. I'm talking about in general. What's your opinion about that? Who wants to do the right thing?
But I think I see the intent of your question, but to reframe it, I think the better question is, who's it easier to hold accountable? Local politicians, state politicians, or business leaders? Because it's not a matter of trust. Every human being has an inclination to be selfish and would be selfish unless you were watching them. In most cases, it's very rare to find benevolence. There's no natural selection does not reward benevolence. If you go around doing things benevolently and not helping anyone, you better be very lucky to have people that support you, or you're going to end up on the street. So that's the reality of life in this country, right? So that's the recognition. From there, you then ask the question, how do you control and contain that inherent, human inclination in the public sphere? Our local politicians, our state politicians, our business leaders. And the answer is different for the different people. Local politicians, you go to city council hearings, you meet with them, you make them know who you are. State level politicians, you talk about them in the media so they feel the pressure when they read it when they get into their office. Business people, it depends who they are. If they're trying to do the right thing, you work with them. If they're malevolent, then you do what Ida Tarbell did with Standard Oil, and you find out what they're trying to hide and expose it.
So a question to you, because you mentioned something about human beings being selfish beings. Doesn't that also go to the politicians too? Aren't they looking to maintain their status in their community? Aren't they looking to just stay elected and in power and not perhaps do the right thing? I mean, I think this is one of the biggest issues we have as a society now, is that people aren't doing the right thing. They're doing what's right for them.
But I think it's more of a question of, is the public talking about what lawmakers are actually doing? Whether on the local level or the state level, it's very easy for lawmakers to say one thing and do another when no one's paying attention. So, and maybe that's an insight that ties back to the earlier topic. The reason all that progress, in my opinion, happened with the CDA dropping the lawsuit, Rev Clinics dropping the lawsuit, is what these folks realize is that cogent public policy discussion of malfeasance is not a winning public relations standpoint. You cannot start off as these guys are malevolently putting their profits above equity and then win the public relations narrative. So the very fact that there's a spotlight and a community discussion about their behavior is itself how you keep them in check. And that doesn't matter. That applies to politicians, business people, or otherwise. It's not so much what they're doing. It's whether people are paying attention.
And yet, and we're up against our favorite time of day, 420 here. But I do just want to throw something out there, Grant, that we're still talking about cannabis, a very niche issue in a niche industry that's just starting. This is it. I mean, if this was going on for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, I could see that the public would be interested in having this kind of discussion. But we're having it here because we recognize it, because we care about these issues. But I still maintain that we're still talking about something that if you walked up to 100 people, probably 90 wouldn't have any idea what we're talking about. Accurate or not?
Yes, but it doesn't recognize the nuance of public relations, which is that that's not right. So if you, I mean, but for the people who are not schooled in
Right.
either Edward Bernays' thought or vice versa, Adorno and Horkheimer, who deconstructed Bernays' thought right after he invented it. But just as a microcosm of this, I love this example. Do you know what Bernays' first campaign was? By the way, back up. Edward Bernays invented public relations. We're talking about public relations in this context to explain the motives of some of these companies and things like that. Edward
The
Bernays,
motive is more PR or for to make money in a capitalist society.
it's a combination of making sure that the two things don't become mutually exclusive, right? Because they hate going around putting out fires. And that's really the reality. They're not thinking about it from the lens of Joe Q. Public. They're thinking about it through the lens of Edward Bernays and his thought. And although I don't know if they even know Edward Bernays, the people that are consulting for them do. And he was Freud's nephew. Freud went bankrupt at the end of his life, and Bernays took Freud's ideas and the ideas of a guy named Le Bon from the late 1800s and packaged them to American companies as early public relations or propaganda. This is my favorite part of his early life. He went to the tobacco companies in the 1920s because it was very unfashionable for women to smoke. And not just smoke. You might know old pictures that show women holding cigarettes with a long black or white piece of plastic attached to it. Mm-hmm. That was not fashionable. It was so their hands didn't touch the cigarette. It was considered grotesque. And obviously that was a very sexist policy. Now, there were people, flappers, fighting for the repeal for women's right to vote in the 1920s. And they were also fighting against sexist stereotypes like that. Bernays linked up with them and asked them at the 1927 Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade to march with cigarettes in their hand, telling reporters that they were their torches of freedom. Within the next year, almost all women were smoking. And so that's kind of the answer there. Companies look for ways to get both things to happen. They like to present the image as if they're supporting some kind of social cause, while in reality using it to benefit their profit. And if they can make it so that they benefit their own that their profits are benefited to the exclusion of other companies or other people, they'll do that too. But the primary goal is using their getting their profit, openly talking about how they're doing it for their own profit, and then hiding it behind the language of social justice.
All right, we're going to bring this up on the other side, but I also want to know, is that Bernays guy the same guy who created the sauce that you put on your filet mignon? That's what I want to know. No?
Wish.
Ish. Okay, never mind. All right, we're going to take our 420 break now. It's a good time to kind of sit back, chill, and certainly respect the time of day that has become the celebration of 420 in the cannabis universe. It all started with the Waldos, this group of kids out in San Rafael, California. They would meet at the Louis Pasteur statue and catch a little buzz, and then the law enforcement people, being those sharp investigative people that they are to uphold public safety, picked up on the fact that there was public consumption of cannabis going on at that location and used 420 as the code for public consumption of cannabis. That's how it all started. The cannabis culture grabbed it and now celebrates 20 past 4. We celebrate by playing a song that served as my 420, which was the song by Jonathan Edwards, called Shanty. So sit back and enjoy that. We'll come back on the other side and we'll continue our discussion about socially responsible capitalism in cannabis. Don't go away.
Yeah, this is a tune that I wrote back in 19... I've forgotten. We had a saying in our old band, one of my first bands in 1966 or so. What are you going to do tonight? Oh, just, like every other night, just going to lay around the shanty and put a good buzz on. Gonna sit down in the kitchen, fix me something good to eat. Make my head a little high, make the whole day complete. Gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. Pass it to me, baby, pass it to me slow. We'll take time out to smile a little before you let her go. We're gonna lay around the shanty, oh mama, and put a good buzz on. You're on something. Go ahead. Rick Brodsky, everybody. Nothing to do and there's always room for more. Fill it, light it, shut up and close that door, baby. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Take it, okay. Prohibition never works, it's time to realize it. It grows in my backyard, it's time to legalize it. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. I'm gonna sit down in my rented car, I'm gonna jam it into drive. Gonna head on out and play at WSCA with Sean, I'm glad I'm alive. We're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on. Every night and day, we're gonna lay around the shanty, mama, and put a good buzz on.
Nice. It's Friday. Thank God.
Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network.
Cannabis Media.
I guess you could say the gang is all here on Cannabis Chat Live. Hi, everybody. Welcome back. We've got a great show planned for you to talk all about the delivery licenses, social equity. And before we got going, before we went to the break, we were talking about socially responsible capitalism. Joining us in the discussion room here, not only is my sidekick, David Rabinovitz. See, you're my sidekick now. You're not my co-host yet, but you're going to jump up here. I know you are, and become that co-host that I know you could be. At the top, we had Grant Smith Ellis with us, of course, who is the president of MassCann. He's also someone who is right in the middle of all the dealings that go on with cannabis in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And joining us now in the room is our old friend Aaron Goins joins us, and now we've got Morris Is it Party or Party? Party. Okay. And now I see popping in here, and he'll be soon popping up in our little cannabis chat room, is David O'Brien, who is also with the Massachusetts Cannabis Business Association. We've been dying to get David on too. So now that I've introduced everybody and I've got everybody on camera except for David, and he's going to pop up. There he is, magically. That's how that happens. David Rabinovitz, are you there?
I am, but we got a lot of dogs barking in the background. That's the challenge of living in a Zoom kind of time.
That's all right. We all get the dog thing. I'd like you to kind of dictate where we go with this conversation moving forward here. And I'm going to sit back and let you handle the hosting opportunity here.
Great. Well, so I think as everybody knows, what we're talking about today is the hot topic in Massachusetts, which is what's going on, not simply with the home delivery licenses, but the drama that took place where the trade association that represents the heavyweights in the industry, the Commonwealth Dispensary Association, sued the Cannabis Control Commission. And organically, a group that includes many of the people who are with us today organized, put together some efforts, and within 4 days dropped their suit. And then not long after that, a suit by Rev Clinics against the city of Cambridge was dropped. And what we're going to talk about is kind of what went on behind the scenes, the positioning, how people came together, what efforts they did, and how they were able to pull off what they pulled off in such a short period of time. And just so that everybody understands, we've got David O'Brien with us, president of the Mass Cannabis Business Association, not the CDA. We have 2 cannabis business associations in Massachusetts, with David being much more supportive, his association for social equity and the whole controversy around the home delivery license. Grant sat at the center of it. So we've invited Grant essentially as a guest host today because there's nobody who probably knows what went on behind the scenes better than Grant. So with that, Grant, I know that we spent the first 20 minutes or so just chatting about on a high level what happened, but how did the grassroots organization come to be, and what was the pressure point that you were able to apply? Because clearly, I doubt within a few days you could have impacted anybody's revenue in the stores. So it had to be some other pressure point.
Yeah, I think what it was it started by way of, a grassroots effort to first track down the businesses that were in the CDA, and their website wasn't as up to date as it could have been. But then it was a matter of getting that information out there. And part of the beauty, I think, of the modern online world, which I'm sure folks are seeing in the national news in its own context right now with the shorts and crazy things with GameStop. But anyway, this was kind of an example of that. It was a proliferation of community discontent in a way that didn't affect, I don't think, consumers, although I did hear that some dispensaries had to take their phones off the hook because they were getting so many calls, but it affected employees. And what was happening was, whether it was, officers of these companies or internal employees or lobbyists, they were going to them and saying, how can you be part of an organization that would make an argument that would seek to invalidate an equity priority period and make it so that only brick and mortar retailers could deliver? How could you openly support such a thing? And then I think what also happened is that there were some reporting. I've already gone public with this, so I feel comfortable saying this, that members of the CDA's board, and I can report this here for the first time on air, as the lawsuit was about to be voted on, 3 different members of the CDA board were approached and told, you are the only member of the board who's opposed to going forward with this lawsuit. So why don't you just step down? So I think it was a combination of internal pressure on the companies and the CDA's internal approach to whipping votes, if we want to call it that, kind of breaking down, that led to the pressure campaign, and that led to the lawsuit being withdrawn.
Aaron, jump in and then add some more color to this.
Not much more really to add. I mean, Grant's thorough. Listen, to be honest about it, their behavior has been pretty disgusting for years now. I think we all recognize that. And the fact of the matter is the grassroots effort is extremely strong. It's much broader than any one particular entity in itself. And I think we come to a point now in our society where on certain topics, a line has to be drawn. And to me, I prefer to be on the right side of history. And social equity, I just don't understand why this is really up for debate. I think they have a perverse understanding of what social equity means. I think it's, on their standpoint, social equity is a mechanism for, as long as they can still profit in this substantially at the disadvantage of everyone else. And I think that we all were able to galvanize behind this, and each particular organization and association, we were all united at this one front. And I think that is what created this pressure. And additionally, this goes above and beyond just a lawsuit. And Grant and I exposed this earlier today. They're perverse in their way that they have exploited social equity participants in these LOI agreements that they are actively currently engaging in, that are extremely exploitive. They strap social equity participants with mounds of debt of which they're never going to be able to escape from. And I find it very interesting that you can hide behind the shield of the CDA and sue against the delivery license, while individual members within the CDA are actively trying to engage in negotiations to be part of the delivery industry using predatory terms in deals. So their hypocrisy has been exposed, and let's just keep on applying this pressure, in my opinion.
David, tell us a little bit about the CBA, what makeup of your membership, and how you guys stepped in on when the controversy started.
Yeah, so a lot of folks listening may not know the history of Mass CBA. We got started back in December of 2017, before anything opened on the recreational side, in part because we knew a new industry was coming, and it was really set up for those aspiring companies that were going to make their way through the pipeline. We knew CDA already existed and serviced the sort of more legacy players, the vertically integrated medicals, who on the one hand helped build this industry. They were the first movers in it, but on the other hand, may not always be so welcoming to competition. And I explain it to people when we pitch membership for Mass CBA. I want 1,000 members of Mass CBA or any trade association, because that's the industry we're trying to build. And from our very beginnings, we built our association around the values of inclusion and equity. It's a part of who we are. 2 of our board members are social equity applicants. Like, we don't just talk about it, we build it in. And it's strange because most people I've spoken to in my time in the cannabis space, which is since the spring of 2017, when I used to run East Coast government relations for Weedmaps, when you talk to folks and you say, hey, do you believe in social equity and making up for the travesty that was the war on drugs, you don't have to finish your sentence before people say, yeah, we need to do more to fix that. This was an opportunity for industry and companies to raise their hand or stand up and say, I stand for social equity, count me in. And companies came on one side of it or another, associations came on it or one side or the other. my sort of greater point is, okay, we have and I talked to Aaron about this earlier this week. We have an opportunity to do something with this. Let's make the most of it.
David, I want to ask you a question right off the bat. Why is there so much, and it's not just Massachusetts. I read about the social equity issues in California. I read about other states that have launched programs like Illinois. Every state seems to have this same stumbling block. They all say, we want to do right by social equity. And then in reality, it doesn't happen that way. Is that what we see when we talk about systemized racism in our businesses and in our culture?
Jimmy, I would say part of the challenge is intentionality is not action. Words on a page, on a ballot question, in a law, in regulation, out of the lips of commissioners who I have grown to respect, the original core of 5 and then the new makeup of the commission. I think it's going to take all of us to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. We don't know what it's going to look like, but what we've done so far in Massachusetts, I've not done this in other states, so I can't speak to what they've done well or not.
Yep.
I want us to do it more right than everybody else. I mean, I've spoken to commissioners past and present about trying to set up a social equity loan fund and really leaning into that. Industry has a huge, huge role to play in that right now. They have always. And how we do that and how we do it well. We love to do first in Massachusetts. We're first in so many categories. It'd be great to be first in this as well.
There's no easy way through that either, by the way. I understand that. I really do. I do want to bring Morris in because he represents credit unions. And you brought up the fact that the industry is trying to make funds available to social equity applicants. Does that trickle down onto the credit union side? And isn't that how credit unions were started, Morris?
Yeah, absolutely. Credit unions really were the people's answer to banks back in the day. And their whole reason for being was that regular people, i.e., 100 years ago, the people who were working in mills, they couldn't get a loan at the bank the way that, professionals could. Just the rules were just so restrictive. You had a lot of immigrants coming from Canada, coming to the US for these great jobs that they heard about in the mills. But they had, of course, serious money problems. So they're going, how do we solve it? And the answer was, if we band together, if we approach this together, we can pool our resources and offer loans at reasonable rates. And so fascinatingly enough, and thanks for teeing it up like this, Jimmy, is we are poised to have this in the cannabis industry, whereas there is almost zero lending through traditional channels right now. But the most likely result of our new administration is that the Safe Banking Act, which has been sort of almost ready to go, is the least plant-touching, least controversial thing that a new administration can get through at the federal level. So if that gets passed, then wow, just freeing up the lending side of the entire normal traditional banking industry could be incredible for helping just everyone in the cannabis industry, of course, especially social equity people.
And
do we want to see descheduling, guys, or do we want to see the banks open? Or does if you deschedule it, it automatically opens the banking?
I think a step-by-step approach makes sense. And so banking first and descheduling down the road. But also let's get, I'm not trying to blank on the term. What is the term for helping people get out of prison who shouldn't be there?
Expungement.
Thank you.
Yes.
Can I ask a policy question to David O'Brien or to anyone else but I guess to David O'Brien first, if you don't mind. So I really respect what you were talking about earlier, which something we talked about earlier in the show, that Commitment to equity is not words on paper or even any single action. It's a pattern of behavior. But there are at least a policy question or two I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on. So we talked earlier in the day about a law that you might be intimately familiar with, which is 94G Section 3, subsection A1I, related to co-location of medical dispensaries as adult use dispensaries. So the first question is, in the context of the Rev Clinic suit, do you think local cities and towns should be able to have equity priority periods that exclude medical dispensaries from co-locating? And second to that, do you think we need a statewide law to incentivize local cities and towns to give priority to equity applicants when issuing local licenses?
I like the fact that cities and towns are getting their acts together when it comes to equity, because it speaks to what they value, right? My read and my sort of follow, I've not been involved in any of the lawsuits. We have not signed on any lawsuits anywhere. My read of that sounded like, and I'm not going to get this exactly right, but if you had opened a medical someplace, the town couldn't then not allow you to open a recreational there.
That was the argument that Rev Clinics had made, but in 3 different decisions by the single justice of the appeals court, the Superior Court, and the single justice of the appeals court again, that was interpreted to mean you cannot prevent them from opening, but that would permit a delay. So what I was asking is, do you think that kind of delay for the purposes of an equity priority period is appropriate?
Again, I'm not a judge or a lawyer, so I can't speak to the legality of that. I like the fact that communities are getting their act together. I mean, remember, this was all brand new to every municipality when the doors or the licensing process opened up. But one of the things I love doing is talking to people from out of state who say, well, you must be an expert on all things cannabis in Massachusetts. I'm like, first of all, it's still in its infancy. Second of all, if I tell you an expert, anybody on these tiles is probably more expert than I am. And if you say you're an expert, it means you know everything there is to know about it. And we're still, in the second inning. If you're a baseball player, this is early days. So I appreciate the fact that social equity is becoming more of an issue. I appreciate that in Boston. It has slowed the process down, but arguably it has slowed it down to the point where it's intentional to provide for opportunity for real inclusion for licenses, not just employment, in the city of Boston, in Cambridge, in Somerville, and elsewhere.
I think it's funny you mention experts, because it's Beth Waterfall from Elevate Northeast who says there are no experts in the cannabis industry because it's only been around for a few years, even though we know that the product itself has been around for thousands of years, and everybody in the business thinks they are expert in whatever field that they're in. But if there's one expert on this panel, it's Grant. So I'm going to put him right back at it. Grant, go ahead.
Well, no, I guess it was just going to be a similar question, and I guess maybe other folks may have an opinion here, but there's 2 cases ongoing right now, Basque versus Taunton and Comcan versus I forget what it is. But those cases involve whether the land court has jurisdiction in the context of a special permit matter to influence local city licensing of cannabis licenses. And so the reason I bring it up is I'm really worried that there's a plan here by some corporate operators to try to expand the jurisdiction of the land court to undermine local licensing. And so I'm kind of wondering what folks think about those cases. And if you don't want to talk about that, what do you think about the SJC about to rule on Mediri versus Salem, which is the potential of the SJC, the Supreme Judicial Court, invalidating the need for host community agreements statewide? So those are my questions.
Great questions. Aaron, I bet you have something to say about that.
The HA process is corrupt. It just allows for so many things to really infiltrate, and it greatly influences those who are larger, incumbent, and well entrenched, disproportionately. So if you're going to really have a conversation about social equity, and one of the overarching issues of social equity is the fact that there is a knowledge gap in some instances and a financial gap. And so removing that barrier where the shift in power that the HCA creates, in my opinion, helps to address the overarching issue of social equity, period, which is that we want fair equal inclusion within this marketplace. And you cannot achieve that when you have regulations in place that allows for concentration of power within each municipality that you're trying to go to. I'll give you the case in point. I'm in Abington, which is one of the 29 disenfranchised whatever places in the state, which I have a whole issue with that. Abington should not be included. But the moratorium lifted June 30th, 2019. My wife and I decided that, you know what? Let's figure out how this process goes. So we went to the town hall on May 15th, 2019. Went there and they said, oh, we already had 4 large operators come in and give presentations back in December. How is that possible when your moratorium doesn't even lift until the end of June? And these are people who have already done the process. It's copy and paste for them. And so us being a little person who have lived in this town for 15 years, and we said to them, is there any type of priority opportunity here in terms of we've lived here for 15 years, we're stakeholders in this town, we pay taxes in this town. So obviously we have a stake in how cannabis is actually executed in this town. They said, no, our lawyer said first in, first out.
Yeah.
And so this is what we're up against. So this is why the ACA process has to go, because it greatly favors those who are currently entrenched. And this is just this is like the easiest issue. There are, I mean, Grant knows there are so many barriers at the ACA process.
Say it can't go, Aaron. That comes back to my point earlier, and Aaron, maybe you want to weigh in. How crucial is it that there be some kind of mandate on the state level for local cities and towns to take into consideration? Why is there equity priority on the state level if we have a bifurcated application process that requires you to get the HCA before your state level license can really become final? It just doesn't make sense that there's no equity consideration there.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what this is. These people are big, they're powerful, they have a lot of money. All right. It's bad enough that this happened to them at the state level. They sure as hell are not in favor of this at the town level. So let's just be very honest and frank here. And like I said, this addresses a portion of the social equity debate that we're going to have here. I just don't see how we proceed in the discussion of social equity at a state level when you're not addressing it at the town level as well, too. And to me, it's just backwards logic, and it just has more light has to be shined on this more. I think a lot of people see, we're all within this. We're living, we're breathing this. We're every day. Your average person can care less because they don't know anything about this. They just know that one day they wake up and there's a dispensary that just opened in their town. Right. They don't understand the hell that you go through, the months of lease payments that you're making. People have gone bankrupt trying to get into these towns and have nothing to show about it. Like, this kind of stuff has to be out there. People have to know about this. My wife and I are paying a fortune right now on something that we just purchased. Okay. And hopefully we're having our community action, our community outreach in 2 weeks in the town. But we're almost coming up on a year. We have put out 6 figures on lawyers, architects, all types of stuff to be prepared for this bullcrap ACA process. And it was like, it's just ridiculous. People have to know what's really going on.
David, I'm going to ask you again this question, and it's something I rail about all the time, being a longtime member of the media in New England. So frustrated that the public, this is still a niche industry, and there's still the people in it are very passionate about it, but the general public still does not understand anything about this plant, let alone trying to do business with this plant. There are no public service announcements provided by anybody in the media to talk about some of these issues and some of these injustices that the people that are in the business that have invested hundreds of thousands of dollars, like Aaron, get it. There's no, I can tell that Jim Browdy gets a chance, and I'm sure you've got on his show. That's the one show in town that does give an opportunity for people to talk about it. But for the most part, the public is still in the dark. How frustrating is it to be in part of a business association in a niche industry that the public still really doesn't get?
Well, it's really frustrating, and I'm not an operator, so anybody on this call that is an operator and has worked with operators, I've heard the horror stories. I mean, one of the tenets of what we try to do is talk about the successes in the industry to let people know that the sky is not falling. We're how many years into this, and the sky still hasn't fallen, and you've collected a lot of revenue from this. The stigma is something to more normalize this in the general public's mind. We have to fight the stigma every day. When there's a bad news story, this has been, to the general public, a controversial news week. I think with better outcomes in the sense of where we're headed. But I have to say something about the HCAs. You all probably noticed that Mayor David Narkowitz sort of did a pivot on this for Northampton and said, I don't know why we're collecting this. We're not spending this money. The text of what's in the bill that didn't pass the Senate and it'll be reintroduced in February by some senators and some House members is that an operator needs to pay reasonably related costs. Now, my mother can figure out what a reasonably related cost is for a new business. And if there aren't any, you shouldn't have to pay the ransom. Honestly, I mean, people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to be in business in a town when they have no effect. And that's why Mayor Narkowitz has gotten rid of it. We're going to hope to recruit other people. We've been on the side of get rid of HCAs. We've supported the commission saying for 2+ years, give us the oversight and the teeth to get rid of these, or at least be able to monitor them so that people aren't being overcharged. No other industry would stand for this. And remember where this came from in the 11th hour for the legislature in July of 2017. I know because I was lobbying on this issue. It was plucked out of the gaming legislation because they're like, hey, this sounds pretty good. Let's give communities a little something extra.
No, it was horse trading. It was horse trading. It was horse trading, I think, on the issue of local control over whether they'd be able to ban the marijuana enterprises without a vote of the constituents. I don't doubt, maybe you know more about the back end than I do, but I do not doubt that when Senator Brownsberger was negotiating that compromise on if it's a yes town, then you have to go to the voters. If it's a no town, I don't doubt that the HCA was part of, hey, we got to get these towns to really get behind this kind of thing.
Yeah.
The MMA, I mean.
Yeah, no, it was the MMA's fingerprints are all over it.
Well, the other fascinating thing in terms of thinking about the towns and this stuff is that I know for a fact at this point in cannabis legalization in our Commonwealth that the towns are absolutely sick and tired of having to update their ordinances seemingly every 6 months to keep up with what the commission is doing. Now, on the plus side, the commission on this last set of regulations has said, yes, we knew we had to keep revising and figuring this out and trying to get this on the right track to start with, but this is it for quite a while, so don't expect any more changes. So at least the towns get a little bit of a breather on like, okay, what are we doing now? What's the state doing now? What's the commission doing now? And the really fascinating thing to me is to look through some of the smaller towns' charters and see what kind of language they have in there. It's like this one small town I'm looking at, it's like, all right, you've got your usual building codes, you've got ordinances around solar panels and stuff like that. You've got ordinances around adult entertainment establishments, and you got rules around cannabis. It's like, those are the three things that a small town has to worry about. How weird is that? That's so weird.
No, that's America. I'm sorry. That's just what we all have to put up with. I'm looking at the clock. We're going to take a break. I know some people might have to bail, but and if you do, I certainly understand that. But we've got another couple people coming in after the top of the hour when we will continue with Cannabis Chat Live. Don't go away. I think.
Coming up on Weed Talk News, Weed Map strikes gold with their IPO, or is it a silver spike? Massachusetts tries to do the right thing for social equity and pisses off their existing dispensaries. New Jersey lawmakers are on the governor's deadline now for launching their Take your Zoom call podcasts or webinars to a whole new level.
Nurse Mark and the Green Nurse Podcast. We are here.
That's right. PCM can animate your logo, add eye-catching full-screen graphics, and lower third identifying motion graphics. Look like the network. Act like the network.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, I'm Jimmy Young, the founder of Pro Cannabis Media. And you know, as a sportscaster on TV and radio for 25 years, people always thought I was an expert on sports. They used to come up to me at bars and go, "Hey, sports guy, are the Bruins going to win the Stanley Cup or what?" I didn't know then, and I don't know now. Just because I reported on sports and talked intelligently about my love for sports, I was not an expert. I was a talk show host, an anchor, a reporter. Sure enough, the same is true in the cannabis industry. Now, even though it's been around for thousands of years, research is just beginning. The difference, of course, is that there are no real experts in the cannabis space. However, we all believe that we're experts in our own field. For instance, we at Pro Cannabis Media have 75 years of combined experience in commercial media, buying, production, and strategic market planning. Now, we want to help you control your message. After all, you're probably considered an expert in your field, whether that's lighting or containers, law, interior design, or even security systems. We already have an expert in the insurance business for MRBs, that's marijuana-related businesses. Bill Perrier from Charles River Insurance is our expert. He's a member of our PCM Gold Club of experts, and he explains that one of the largest insurers in the world is now writing insurance for cannabis farmers.
Lloyd's of London, 325 years old, the standard bearer in the market, is with a company called Chesterfield Brokers that have launched this parametric insurance for crops.
Insurance is all about timing, and it's a shame we couldn't have got these programs up for the farmers and the other cannabis growers who've been really affected by those West Coast fires.
We also have an accountant for the cannabis space. He's a CPA, Rick Leneve of Accounting Buds, and we rely on both of them for their expertise, and we showcase their expertise in our news and talk shows. In fact, we'll put them inside our original content, and we can talk to them. It's kind of like product placement. So show off your knowledge inside our content as we position your expertise in your field. And you do that by joining our Cannabis Gold Club of Experts. That's where you get a chance to show our audience your expertise in your field. This group of entrepreneurs will serve as a referral network in order to generate leads for your business and, of course, build your expertise because it'll be shared during our weekly news and talk shows. So if you want to take advantage of our following and the original content we produce on a weekly basis, contact me, Jimmy Young, or our sales team today. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, welcome back to Cannabis Chat for a Friday afternoon. We are live here every Friday from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. I'm Jimmy Young with Pro Cannabis Media. I'm always joined by David Rabinovitz from MassCann and Cannaventure. Grant Smith-Ellis is with us from MassCann. I believe David O'Brien is still with us from the Massachusetts Cannabis Business Association. And we're now joined by our New Jersey correspondent. Do you like how I did that, Dan? Dan Ulloa from Hetty, New Jersey. And I understand there's breaking news from New Jersey. Dan, tell us about what's going on down in the Garden State.
Yes, so we passed our legislation, our enabling bill and our decriminalization legislation on December 17th. We had been at an impasse because the governor wanted there to be penalties for those under 21 caught with cannabis. A bill went through the legislature at the first week of January, but then it failed due to lack of support. We had been in a stalemate for about 3 weeks now, and out of the blue, when all looked dark, it seems we have a compromise now. Now we have a bill that just went through a committee this afternoon very quickly after being introduced. This bill, now we have a $50 to $100 range for those 18 to 20 caught with cannabis, and then we have warnings for those under 18 caught with cannabis, so hopefully, this compromise will work out and we'll be able to pass the legislation soon and get our adult use cannabis market open.
There you go. Well, that is actually, first of all, I'm glad that they finally came up with some compromise that somehow or other makes some sense in many ways. David O'Brien, from your perspective, looking at New Jersey, what advice would you give the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association based on some of the things that you've learned over the last few years in Massachusetts?
Well, I've spent a little time in New Jersey. So when I was doing East Coast government relations for Weed Maps back in 17 and 18, I was in New Jersey when the legislature was moving legislation through. I met with Senator Nick Scuteri and other senators, and it never got across the finish line. So the ballot question, not a big surprise, was the process. I think one of the things that we've learned as an industry here and as an association is be who you are from the beginning, and that'll hold you in good stead. I never knew that I would learn that as harshly or as impactfully as I have this past week. Normally I'm not as active in my work life over the weekend, but thanks to you, Grant, I was on my Twitter and my Facebook and my every social channel, my LinkedIn. I was like, holy cow, this thing is moving. But I mean, if you all are committed to building an industry that is inclusive and building the industry you say that everybody wants, build it into who you are as a mission, and then hold people to account.
There you go. I think everybody, certainly in this forum, recognizes that there's opportunities here. It's the balance between the socially responsible capitalist and those that are perhaps more influenced by greed and power. And it's that balance. And Grant, you brought it up as a human trait. And I do see this not just here in Massachusetts or in New Jersey, but in all of the new states that are coming on board now. There is still that money grab that I think is causing a lot of people to stab each other in the back and to be the first one in and to be the biggest and the best. And I worry just because I'd like to see a new industry get a fair shake of it, if you will, an opportunity to grow before it even starts. And this is my frustration is that this isn't, what other new industry do we have? And Grant, you're the historian here, and you're probably going to be able to name 4 or 5 things right off the bat. But is there another industry that you can look at that has had the similar kind of growth pattern that the cannabis industry has had in the first, half dozen years here, or even a decade?
No, and I'll tell you why. And it's directly because of something I've been waiting to mention all show. And so I'm glad I got it in before I had to go. It's because the way federal corporate personhood works, it's a lot easier for power to be consolidated in almost every other industry in the United States, except for that which the federal government doesn't really deal with. And for anyone not familiar, there's a great case from 1939. It's Connecticut Life Insurance v. Johnson. And in that case, there's a great dissent by Justice Hugo Black. And he talks about how in 1888, so the 14th Amendment, it was passed in light of the Civil War ending, and it was what gave personhood to emancipated slaves. And it took 15 years for that amendment, according to Justice Black in his dissent, to be turned from a way to liberate slaves to a way to absolve corporate persons of liability under federal oversight. And the way that it happened, it just shows why for a lot of these industries, it's child's play for them. What happened was there's a case in 1888, Santa Clara County versus Southern Union Pacific. Cases are summarized by a court reporter's note. And in a court reporter's note, in front of the decision, someone got the court reporter to write that the congressional committee that framed the 14th Amendment and wrote it had intended it to cover corporations. And because of that single note in the report on that case from 1888, corporate persons in regards to federal law have been pretty much beyond the ability of anyone to deal with. And so for them, it would have been child's play if cannabis had been legalized federally, but it wasn't. It was legalized state by state by state by state, and their mechanisms of control were not really built to deal with that kind of thing, and it blindsided them. And that's why I think it's been able to, and not every state is this way. They got control in some states, but this state is unique, Massachusetts.
Interesting. Great stuff, Grant, as usual. And I don't know if you have to bail this moment, but Lord knows, I feel like I should be taking notes on everything that you say, because I think there'll be a quiz later or something, you know? I'm impressed. That's a compliment. Okay. Okay. David, bail me out of this, David Rabinovitz. Come on.
So let's take a moment. And since we're talking about social equity, right? And Mass Cannabis Business Association has been very supportive, especially as of late, and very vocal in their support as of late. David, tell us a little bit, if somebody is in the social equity program, but they're not yet in business, so they can't afford $500 a month dues, is there any kind of a program for them to become involved with the Mass CBA?
There is. One of the things that a friend of mine said a while ago is inclusion is getting in the room, equity is being at the table. And it strikes me that too few people get in the room, let alone get at the table. And if part of what companies that are up and running and can afford to pay dues to organizations can do is bring a friend along and mentor somebody, that's one of the first tenets of membership at Mass CBA. We expect every company to at least mentor one other company. Hopefully they do more than one. Most people tell me when I pitch that to them, we're already doing that. But if you have others, we'll do it again. But for social equity and economic empowerment applicants, it's $75 annually to belong to Mass CBA. And they get you, well, when we were doing events, they get you into all of our events and get you on our email and get you basically connected to players in the industry to say, what do you need? Like, don't wait for us to send you an email to say, hey, we're open. You're a member of ours. And we work with a lot of people who are not members, just to be frank, to say, what do you need? Let me connect you with somebody who can help you with that. And then once the company's open and generating revenue, we hope they'll consider full membership later on. But we don't do a freemium model of like, hey, come free for 6 months and then we whack you. If you're not open yet in your social equity or economic empowerment, $75 for the year.
There you go.
Oh, that's great.
That is fair.
That's,
what are you doing now that you don't have events and conventions, and how challenging has this COVID adaptation been for the Mass CBA?
It's been hard, but one of the things we've been leaning into for the past several months is we did an analysis with UMass Boston, Dr. Jeff Moyer on HCAs, and we've been waiting to release this for months. And we were hoping the legislature and the governor were going to actually get the HCA bill through, and we were going to say, here's some proof of why this was so necessary. We're probably going to release that in a month or so when the bills are refiled for HCAs, and have a conversation about Northampton and other places. Uxbridge, I know, tried to get rid of the HCA process. Grant, I may call you to help us get the grassroots enlivened on this, because I know pretty much everybody in the pipeline that is trying to get into business, whether they be social equity, economic empowerment, general applicants, everybody sees the HCA, I think, as an impediment to doing business, and we want to get rid of it. You shouldn't have to pay a VIG 3% for just living in a community when no other business is subject to that other than gaming. The liquor store doesn't have to do it. The grocery store doesn't have to do it. Dunkin' Donuts doesn't have to do it. Why does cannabis? Because it's new and it's scary.
Bargain.
And okay, it hasn't been scary yet, so why are you still collecting the fee?
You don't want to get rid of special permits, right? Or local licenses. You just want the HCA gone.
Yeah, I mean, so the way the legislation was drafted, like it or not, was they wanted communities to want to host these businesses. I think more and more communities are coming off the ban and the no list. They're like, hey, we're missing out on a lot of revenue opportunity just on the sales tax or just on the money that might come back to us on the state piece. Maybe we should reconsider.
Will we see that?
We saw one community this week that announced they're getting away with they're dumping their community impact fee. I mean, pure honesty is they finally realized there is no adverse community impact for hosting a marijuana business, or none that they can find economically, right? Most of the host community agreements in the state say the parties all agree there's going to be an impact, but we can't figure it out. We can't monetize it. So you'll just agree to pay us a certain amount of money. And, even though that's not what the law says.
Yeah, no, you look at the renewal paperwork. The commission publishes this when they have their monthly meetings. The renewal paperwork for those that are open and in business, some of the amounts are staggering. There was one that was $495,000 out in Western Massachusetts. And I asked the owner, like, do you like paying that? He's like, no, but it's what I agreed to. So There was, although I talked to some lawyers who represent some of the companies, and they're like, we may not have been under duress and we did sign it, but basically the solicitor or the mayor or whoever was in charge of the HCA process said to us, you signed this because we have two other companies out in the lobby that will.
Right.
You wanted the license, so you paid the ransom.
Yep.
They learned that from the medical program, by the way, where municipal rent seeking was allowed. But the other issue is it's going to be two steps no matter what. Because right now, before we think, whether or not HCAs are gone entirely, the HCA fixed bill that passed last year that the co-chair of the Joint Cannabis Policy Committee, Dave Rogers, submitted, got through the House, stalled in the Senate, would do something that has to happen first, I think, which is right now the cap is 3%, but the commission in 2018, over the objection of Commissioner Shalene Title, voted that they wouldn't be enforcing that 3% cap, which basically told those towns, hey, you can get as much as you can from these companies. That went on until Andrew Lelling, the U.S. Attorney General, had to start investigating it, at which point the State House finally did something. So I see it probably happening in two steps. I don't doubt they're going to change the law to cap that 3% at a hard 3%, and then maybe they'll look at lowering it or abolishing it. But I think the conversation's long overdue.
Yeah, I think to that point, Grant, I think if the other thing that comes out of this legislation is give me a receipt that has detail on what you spent it on for reasonably related costs for mitigating having me here as a cannabis company. That's all they're asking for. Just, you'd never pay someone an invoice that just had a bottom line and didn't have the detail in any other business. You just wouldn't. So why are we doing it in this?
Funny,
so I think it became a circular argument because the commission said we don't have the authority. The Marijuana Joint Policy Committee at the time said, yes, you do. No, we don't. Yes, we do. If the commission doesn't think they have it and they're asking for it, just give it to them. Let them do their job.
Got to give people tools to do their jobs, no matter what they're in, whether that it relates to sports, politics, businesses, and sometimes those who are deciding who is involved and what tools you actually need don't listen to the people who are doing that job. It's funny. We all look at what the industry that we're in with a fine-tooth comb, with a magnifying glass. It eventually will work out. these are all growing pains for a new industry. And this is what I hear. These are my observations of what I see. But I really don't, I'm not sure if there are enough open forums. David, how many, not necessarily meetings, but how many open forums do you guys run as an association? Is it monthly? Is it weekly? How does the
we were probably
occur?
more like quarterly pre-COVID,
Yeah.
and we haven't done as many as we'd like in
Yeah.
COVID. I mean, some of the forums I'd like to run now are, related. And David Rabinowitz and I talked about this, I think, the day before Thanksgiving, is how do we engage the social equity and economic empowerment community? Because one of the things I heard that came out of from my discussion with David, but also individual social equity applicants, is there was a bit of an unintentional setup to getting technical assistance and training. And I'd come out on the other end of being a graduate of a cohort, and I'd be ready to go, and I'd be able to write a business plan, and I'd get a little bit more help. And then there'd be a big bag of money waiting for me to get into business. That was never on offer, nor should it have been, because there wasn't a source for it. So that's why I think industry playing a role to say, all right, how do we set something up separate from me? I'm not making this decision. I don't have any right or bandwidth or expertise to do it. Get people who understand banking and finance to say, all right, let's set up this fund and give people help. And once they're ready and the business plan is tight and it's a fundable organization, is sort of what David and I talked about. How do we get that company to its next step? And if, like every other company, they get funds in tranches, whether it's no interest loans, low interest loans. Is there a way to do grants for the early part of it to sort of say, okay, this company we believe is a good bet. Let's help it along. And if it's not going to make it, fail fast before you waste $500,000, $250,000, because it's not in that person's interest to invest their retirement or their relationships with their friends and family. And they're like, no, I really think this can happen. And then your brother-in-law looks at you and says, I can't send my kid to college now because I gave you money to run a weed company. Like, help me out here,
Do you know my in-laws? No, I'm only kidding. Sorry. I want to throw something out here, and Dan Uloa, I think you're gonna like this, because the rules and the laws are they're evolving in New Jersey. I saw a story today, and David Rabinowitz and I must share a lot of newsletters and emails that we get from the industry. And there's a movement now, and it looks like it's coming through different countries, about taxation of cannabis based on the intensity or the percentage of THC in the product. Nothing surprises me, by the way, when it comes to news items like this, but I was a little shocked and taken back by this, because it really does open up another level of bureaucracy, which basically means you're going to look at a test result and then you're going to immediately say, well, this product, this strain has a 22% THC rate, therefore we're going to tax it at this rate. And to me, isn't that like taxing different proofs of spirits and wine versus beer? I think that, again, it's muddying waters. What's the group's feeling about this? And maybe we'll start with Dan Uloa in New Jersey, who's going to have to deal with all sorts of different ideas like this in New Jersey to cover.
Yeah, it certainly is muddying the waters, and it does complicate things unnecessarily. We were trying to figure out, I think that we have the system that they were trying to create, I think would lower the tax as the amount went up. It's very complicated the way they were trying to do it here, trying to balance concerns about trying to get enough revenue to fund social justice programs, but not too much taxes that it would hurt the program overall. And they came to a sort of balance, but it's very hard, and it's always hard to predict these things when you have so little data.
And you don't have the education level of the people that are making the laws, or even at the commission level. Again, it all goes back to education. I do like hearing what we're hearing about now from some of the mayors of Northampton or some of the other local communities who are recognizing that those impact fees really aren't necessary. So they're starting to kind of see, wow, we didn't expect that this new industry would be as easy to deal with. They thought it would be, lines out the window and around the corner, and it would just be overwhelming to the world and the society around them. Now you drive by different dispensaries, you don't even know that they're there sometimes. But this is the kind of thing, when I read stuff like this, it's like, really, guys, this is not going to advance anything. And if anything, it's going to cause more of an issue. David Rabinowitz, I know you have an opinion about this.
Jimmy, I think the tax is already in that way, right? Grant, when you buy product, right, you pay more for something that's more potent, correct?
No, not in every state. No.
Right. Again, and every state's going to have different rules. The homegrown, the fact that Massachusetts has it and no one has brought that up for a long time. And yet when you read about different states, they're fighting in New Jersey about home grow.
Our home grow sorry, Dan, I want him to be able to weigh in, but our for the record, our home grow for medical patients in Massachusetts just got expanded.
Right.
In Massachusetts, home grow for adult use is 6 plants if you have 1 adult in the house, 12 if you have 2. A medical patient without a hardship license can now grow 12 flowering plants, 12 immature plants, and have unlimited clones. And if you get a hardship license, you can grow up to 500 square feet in your home. But anyway, I don't understand why, when Massachusetts has had no issues with it, as David mentioned earlier, the sky did not fall with home grow. We've even expanded it. And you know why? The reason is simple. Corporate operators who have the same profit-driven mentality that led to the anti-delivery equity lawsuit view home grow as a threat to their profit. It's not appropriate to use laws and regulations to undermine access to the cannabis plant to protect your profits in that way. And that's why I hope, just like Virginia, which had a low home grow cap passed a few weeks ago of just 4 or proposed, there's no reason New York, New Jersey, and every other state that still has work to do cannot at least do 4 plants for home grow, at least.
I agree 100%. What do you hear about New York? Dan, I know that you're not in New York, New Jersey, but it's not far away. Cuomo's really trying to get it moved forward, and every time he throws something out there, gets thrown back at him.
Yeah, so Cuomo had a proposal recently that said no home grow. State Senator Liz Krueger had a bill that said home grow. And yeah, I think Grant was right there that we are seeing corporate pushback to say that this would cut into industry profits. It's really difficult because we have a lot of people that really want home grow. It was mentioned several times in testimony in November and December by many advocates, which is something that we absolutely need for medical patients. And our New Jersey Cannabis Trade Association, the Association of the Dispensary, said they're for medical home grow. This is something that you need. If you need a specific plant, a specific strain or cultivar to treat an issue, you need that strain. You don't need another strain that's similar. And it's really galling that the amount that they don't understand or don't care or say, well, maybe we'll do it later. So it's been really frustrating in that fashion for many activists, many people. A lot of people are disillusioned that our bill, as good as it is, decent for social justice, social equity issues, and a just industry, has no home grow. And it's really barely on the conversation. Today, a state senator, Jerry Cardinale, introduced a bill about that. But this guy was against legalization for a while, to say now that there's the referendum passed, maybe he's for it. So we'll see what happens with that effort, but I'm not that optimistic, frankly.
I'm glad I'm not in New Jersey. It gives, it allows David O'Brien, that must make you feel good that, hey, this state actually did get it right this way anyway.
Yeah, I feel like Massachusetts, and I'd be interested in Grant and David's take on this. I feel like we took the best of that came before us, plus a little more to start. And with time, we may sort of come back off what may be perceived as over-regulation in some categories, because they sort of went to the worst case scenario, because Massachusetts might do it wrong. So let's prevent wrong from happening. And I think with time, we'll fix some of like the HCA, and we'll fix things that are clearly impediments to getting into business, to being successful in business, and allow for, home grow and allow for, I mean, this industry was built on the backs of medical patients.
Right.
You don't get to kick them to the curb at any point along the way.
Well, I certainly appreciate that. Yes, I have my arthritis issues, but I will not grow it because I'm afraid of killing a plant. I just can't do it. Too much responsibility for me, and I'd rather support the medical community, to be honest with you, in many ways. And I don't get taxed on it, which is good for a medicinal patient. Grant, you feel the same way, don't you, about the ability to give the medical patient a break?
I think those are two different questions. So my first response is I'm fine with not taxing medical patients.
Okay.
The second question is there's been a long history of conflating medical patient access with dispensary profits. And that I'm fine if dispensaries want to exist. I don't like that dispensaries in Massachusetts were founded as nonprofits back in 2012, and then were allowed to switch when the adult use law passed to for-profit companies. And one thing I really don't like, and I do want to bring up, is that in Massachusetts and in a lot of states, we have had medical dating back to 2012. There was never an equity program for ownership of any kind whatsoever. Now, Massachusetts also has a vertically integrated medical industry, and the commission or lawmakers are thinking about breaking up or de-verticalizing those licenses and allowing, just like adult use, for folks to apply for individual retail, cultivation, delivery, or otherwise licenses. I'm strongly advocating that all of those new medical licenses, if they're broken up, only go to equity companies for 3 to 5 years. There's been pushback and folks saying, oh, just waive the application fees. No, 6 years or whatever it is, 9 years of no equity ownership for medical companies. Those equity applicants deserve a chance to get those medical licenses, in my opinion.
Cool. David Rabinovitz, what you feeling about that?
My attention got pulled away for a moment for something I'll talk to Grant about a little bit later.
Uh-oh. Come on, I'm a reporter. What? We want to know. Don't tease us.
He was probably reviewing product for the stream.
Oh,
so as you know, Jimmy, from when the first time we had Rico Schmidt on the show with us, there was discussion about the fact that MassCan and had the affiliation with Normal was terminated last summer with all the drama where we had people who were on the wrong side of some issues on our board. And I think recently with what happened in the Capitol, there was some great posts on Facebook about, if you're not sure whether you're on the right side of the issue, look around to see if anybody on your side has Nazi tattoos. Because if they do, you're probably not on the right side of the issue. And that's kind of something that had happened last summer. Apparently, Normal has reached out to MassCan to make a suggestion that maybe we could reapply.
Oh, so that's what you got distracted about. Okay.
But and I think we're doing much greater things on our own with Grant leading MassCan now. This huge win, which we started talking about today, of the CBA backing down, then Rev Clinics backing down. I mean, we're making a lot of strides independently. So, but the question you were asking me had to do with thoughts about social equity. And now it's escaped my brain.
He filibustered his way to try to remember it. He's like, shit, what was that?
That's okay. It's Friday afternoon. It's after 4:20. We get it, guys. I really do. I really do. I do want to let's table that thought about Normal and MassCan. I think one of the first things that anybody who thinks about Normal and MassCan and knows anything about Massachusetts is, are there plans to bring back the Freedom Rally in any way, guys? Now that I have the president and the treasurer in my room here?
It's not up. Well, there was a virtual Freedom Rally last year in September, which was a lot of fun. 8 hours of speakers and panels and giveaways. But it's actually not up to us. So the city of Boston is subject to the pandemic guidelines issued by the state. So our ability to work with the park rangers and to get the stage up and all of that is dependent on the state changing its guidance. However, we're going full steam ahead as if they're going to, and they won't. We'll adapt as we need to.
Are you guys, let me ask you a question. I might as well just take advantage of this. Are you married to Boston? I mean, it is Massachusetts.
Well,
you have a western part of the state that's so much friendlier to cannabis than the city of Boston. I know tradition and all this, but I mean, why wouldn't you do something in the western part of the state? There's a lot of land out there.
The tradition is it's mixed. So the first ever Freedom Rally in 1989 was in North Adams. The second Freedom Rally was at the U.S. Constitution in 1990. And then every Freedom Rally since has been on the Common. The reason why we won't leave the Common is we've fought over 5 lawsuits with the city of Boston. And that precedent is something that means a lot to us. And that Boston Common site is reflective of the battles that have been fought and won to keep it there. So I think that's why it means a lot to keep it there.
Nice. I've heard good things about the Freedom Rally.
There's nothing bad to hear about it, Dan.
Yeah. Well, hang on. That's correct. The event itself is awesome. Sometimes people get tired of cleaning up after themselves, which, by the way, has nothing to do with the product. It has to do with, I don't know about you guys, but I have this issue with people going into a room and then leaving that room. And I'm saying people, let's not put an age, let's not put a gender on it. Let's just say people, not leaving the room like they found that room. Are you familiar with that MO at all by human behavior?
Well, no, but I just want to say on the Freedom Rally front, so we did actually a few years ago have an issue with that, and it wasn't attendees, it was vendors.
Correct.
Our own vendors had left some of their stuff on the Common. So what we then did, starting in 2018, and we've done it every year since, at least when we had it, is we hired Beantown Greentown, which is a local micro business social equity applicant. And I wouldn't say hired, but they volunteered, and we put their banner on the stage, and then they were in charge with Smokey the Bear walking around to clean up. And they did such a wonderful job. I know Jen Neifer in the Mass Cannabis community volunteered one year as well. The amount of effort that folks have been willing to put in to make sure that that Common stays clean after the rally in the past few years is superhuman. So
yeah, I agree. And don't leave your pan in the sink. Okay. And it has nothing to do with the Freedom Rally. It just is a pet peeve of mine. Let's just say all people have this. We have those human behaviors that we do. We don't like to clean up after ourselves sometimes. Let's just leave it at that and move on to another subject, shall we? What's next for MassCan, Mr. President and Mr. Treasurer? What would you guys like to see happen in the next year? And Lord knows, let's go on the assumption that this pandemic will somehow disappear in a year after everybody gets vaccinated or so, however quickly we can make that happen.
What do you think, David?
Well, Grant and I were actually talking about that this afternoon, right? MassCan, a lot of what the mission is about, originally, from what I understand of the history of the organization, it's called the Coalition because it became a coalition of various activists, right? A lot of the activism now is in different directions. We're not a federal organization or a national organization. We're a state organization. We got decriminalization, 2008. We got medical legalization, 2012. We have adult use legalization, 2016. We now have a real industry. We've got business associations like David O'Brien who are supporting it. So we've got conferences, conventions. There's not so much to fight about when we gather on the Boston Common every year. It's not like it's civil disobedience. I think the greatest civil disobedience now are people consuming marijuana in public. It's not like you're going to get arrested for it. And there's pictures of people in the early years who would get arrested for it. So we now need to find areas where people have passion. Grant, because of a number of things, he has a great passion. He's smart, he's articulate, and he's very much tuned into what's going on the commercial side of things, the big operators who are trying to take advantage. That we were talking about that earlier today. That could become part of our 2021 platform of where do we focus our efforts? Because a lot of what we do now is educational, and our activism had kind of slid to the side. We're reinvigorating it, and with this big win, we've been getting national attention over Grant's efforts. And I could see that could become our focus, like trying to fix things so that the smaller operators can get into the business. What David O'Brien was talking about and Grant with the host community agreement process, as you know, Jimmy, that's how we started, right? Back in 2018, you called me up and said, we need somebody to fill a seat. Somebody bailed out. And I started to talk to you and Kurt about how with the HCA process, it's the landlords that were controlling the state decisions, right? Well, that may become the direction we go. We're trying to, we've got a lot of things that we're looking at. The Freedom Rally will hopefully happen this year, especially what's helpful to us is Boston Marathon's not going to be until October of this year. So we don't have a conflict because it looked like had we had it last year, there may have been a conflict with the Boston Marathon. I suspect the Boston Freedom Rally would have lost. So hopefully we're going to be back doing our normal things and with more of a defined mission as to the direction we're going to go. But that's why we voted Grant in as president. He's got the strategic view of where we ought to be driving to, and that's what we needed in the lead seat.
There you go. Hey, David O'Brien, for Cannabis Business Association, one of the things that the law put in place was social clubs. And Lord knows, because of the pandemic, needless to say, nobody wants to hang out in public together with strangers at this point because of the pandemic. We get that. Moving forward, where do you see the development in business? Is it in tourism? Is it in social clubs? And not in 2021. Let's just take 2021 out of the equation. Let's look at 2022 and beyond. Where will we see new influxes of businesses coming perhaps into the Commonwealth to develop, whether it be from a tourism spectrum or a social club entity?
Yeah, no, I think if you look at the pipeline, and if a good percentage of what's in the pipeline gets funded and open and is successful and profitable, we're going to build out our retail cultivation, more cultivation and manufacturing coming online, hopefully with the renewed urgency that I think we all share on this call of inclusion in social equity and economic empowerment applicants, so that we're not celebrating just the handful that have gone first, but it becomes 2 digits and then more, and a greater percentage of the industry. I think social equity is sort of the next thing in waiting that's to come. I agree with you, it's not a 21 issue as far as it happening, but having the commission address it and stand it up, and the willing communities, I guess there's a dozen communities that were part of a study group on it. And I think more and more communities are going to be opening up and coming off the banned list and maybe easing their way into, hey, we should probably consider doing this. So I just see more growth in the industry. On the tourism front, Jimmy, I think it's interesting because I've had conversations with folks recently that sort of the lodging community is trying to get their arms around how to become a cannabis-friendly B&B or a hotel or what have you.
Yep.
So that is something that I think will become a differentiator for some folks, rather than having to try and sneak it out the window of the B&B you're staying in or something.
Or the Freedom Trail or anything like that. That's in public, so we don't do it in public either. But
right, of course not. No.
Right.
No one would do that.
Oh, by the way, just to jump in there so everyone knows, and I might get this wrong, I think it's 94G 13C is the chapter of MGL. It says that you cannot smoke cannabis in public unless you have a medical card. And if you have a medical card, you can then smoke cannabis in public anywhere where cigarette smoking is allowed. And the citation is 94G chapter 13C.
Actually, you are right, because I do know that it is in the smoke-friendly areas that are out there in public. That's accurate. I don't know if it was 13C or 13D, but I trust you, Grant. I don't know. I'm making that up. But I do know that in places that you are allowed to smoke cigarettes in public, which, by the way, as someone who really doesn't like the smell of cigarette smoke or cigar smoke, I can handle on the golf course or wherever. But needless to say, I prefer the pungent aroma of cannabis to a tobacco smell. But again, personal preference more than
every time someone gives me a weird look when I'm smoking cannabis in public, I say welcome to Massachusetts. And if you don't know the reference, if you go to Egypt and you're a foreigner, they will just say welcome to Egypt to you in English over and over and over and over again.
Oh, cool. Have you been to Egypt?
No, I had a friend who studied at American University in Cairo when he was in his undergraduate studies.
There you go. You are just a wealth of information, Grant. I am so impressed with the depth of your knowledge in this arena. I really am. I've always enjoyed that about you.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say, Jerry.
People used to say that about my sports knowledge, but not anymore. Let's just say, David, I'm calling on you. Rabinowitz, not O'Brien. Rabinowitz. I'm gonna David O.B. and David R. How's that? Is that better?
It's great.
Okay. What you got? Come on. You're always someone I could go to and you could come up with something. Did you remember what you forgot about?
Did I remember what I forgot? No, that one is gone, Jimmy. That one is moved, man. That'll come back to me at about 2 a.m.
All right. Fair enough. I understand that. Daniel Loa, is there anything in New Jersey as far as social clubs on the horizon, or are they still trying to figure out, now that they figured out the underage thing, I think, what are they going to move on to next to debate?
Well, ideally, like, the bill should be signed and the process of setting up our Cannabis Regulatory Commission should begin shortly. I believe we need 2 more commissioners named for it to be like fully seated. Consumption lounges, I believe. I think that's what you mean by social clubs.
Right.
Similar idea.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So consumption lounges are like allowed in our bill S21 and should be allowed. I definitely think it's a great idea. I enjoyed one in New York, so that was fun. So we need more of those.
Yes. Yes.
Can I ask Dan? Do you like Dan? Do you like the CERTA or the MRTA? And do you think Cuomo can be pressured enough to make the MRTA more like the CERTA?
Can you explain what that? No. But hang on a second. Please explain to us what those mean. CERTA and MRTA. Sounds like Yertle the turtle.
So I think Kruger's. So I guess what, like State Senator Liz Kruger's bill is probably the CERTA, and Cuomo's is the MRTA, I could assume.
Yes.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting to see like what can happen there. Like New York has like a terrible medical program, like as bad as Jersey did under Christie. So like I don't like. It's been like hard to see like them like really establish something and like think that they're gonna like pressure Cuomo to get like a real progressive bill. That's gonna be tough. It's gonna be tough. You know, they might need Cuomo to like whip votes. Liz Kruger said on a podcast, or her chief of staff did, that like he did not whip votes like for the bill at the crucial moment in 19, that they got like the decrim instead. So like we'll see like what happens. But like I'm not an expert in New York the way I could say I'm an expert in Jersey. So
they lost that vote you're talking about by 2 votes. And it was because it didn't get whipped. But what's really interesting is you're right about New York's medical program. It only and this is fascinating, they only are allowed ground flower for the purposes of vaping. No smokable flower, no edibles allowed in New York's medical program. But of course, the 2 registered operations, or whatever they're called, the medical dispensaries, get first dibs under Cuomo's proposal for adult use licenses. Of course.
Of course.
Isn't that what happened in Oklahoma, and didn't Colorado do it that way too? Medical to adult use?
Isn't that what led to Massachusetts approving 241 medical dispensaries for adult use licenses before a single economic empowerment was given an adult use license? And the answer is yes.
Thank you.
So like Colorado, well, a few of the states like had like more developed like cannabis programs, and then transitioned easier into it in that way. Like obviously, like social equity is something that did not start at the beginning, at the forefront of the conversation, has grown, thankfully, and that's in part why it's such a big issue here in New Jersey to create like a just industry, to try to be a model for other states. To say we'll see what happens with that. You know, we have an all right bill, but yeah, like New York State was the state where you had like the associations of the dispensaries wrote a letter to Cuomo saying they hate home grow and don't have home grow, and that got public.
Anyway, I got to say goodbye, gents. I have a prior commitment, but I hope you enjoy the rest of your discussion. It was great talking with you all.
Grant, you're welcome. Welcome any old time. I appreciate it. And thank you for the history lesson.
Thank you all.
All right.
Jimmy, can I ask Dan a question?
Of course you can.
I would not be doing my job if we didn't do some interstate commerce. If you have anybody in New Jersey who wants to look at Massachusetts for partnership or looking to invest in social equity or any other license types, we'd welcome it. And when you're ready for Massachusetts players to start looking at your market once it gets turned on, please give me a call. We'd love to help.
Yeah, definitely. That's definitely like an issue. I definitely have like looked to Massachusetts to see like what it could be like here. I visited a couple of times last year, found it be all right. And yeah, like we ourselves have these issues similar, I think, this community agreement, host community agreements that you've been discussing.
Yeah, don't let them happen.
Yeah, so it's really hard here because I think we do have like a great like history of like home rule, and like towns have like a lot of autonomy to say no, we can't have this. So we have like a lot of stupid towns in New Jersey. We have more towns in California, and a lot of these small towns really hate cannabis, which is quite unfortunate. But
yeah,
it's why it keeps coming down to education. And this is, and you know, I'd love, now, David, I know you must know some of the New Jersey people because David Rabinovitz and I know a couple of the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association people. I'm sure that you're at least friendly enough or linked in with them that there has to be some kind of, you know, that interstate commerce thought process, if you will hopefully be addressed at the federal level at some point in the not too distant future. But we don't know how quickly that's going to happen. You know, Lord knows we'd be happy to open up any doors we can to introduce you to some of the people that we've already been in touch with down in New Jersey, because we recognize that that market in that state is, look, it's going to be an issue for a couple of years. I mean,
yeah,
what are we, 4 years past ballot now in Massachusetts, and we're still discussing plenty of the things that aren't working right, if you will, or not working as well as we'd like them to see.
Yeah, and I know a lot of the New Jersey policymakers just in my brief time down there, and it strikes me that if they could avoid making policy mistakes because it comes from another state that they trust. I mean, I think Massachusetts is a legit state when it comes to
no question. Well, we've
got
got
to do public policy, right? And I know there was that initial effort to do regionalization around the vape safety stuff that Cuomo convened and other states participated in. I mean, a harmonized regulatory framework prior to federalization so that operators who are multi-state and like, you know, I'm going to do it in New Jersey, I'm going to do it in Connecticut, I'm going to do it in New York, makes some sense. I guess everybody wants to have their own label of how they do it and their own sort of uniqueness. But if there's things that we can do and pass along, we're happy to be helpful from the business association. And I know members of our legislature and the Cannabis Control Commission and staff there are an open book to try to be helpful. So.
You know me, I'm all about open communication amongst us all. And actually, one of the things, David, I'd love to throw out at you as an idea is an open dispensary forum where you can offer this to your members, where we could host bringing in experts, whether they be on compliance or they marketing or on insurance or on security or architecture. I'm all about giving an open forum for others to share ideas and to communicate. And it's interesting because of the pandemic, we've all learned how to do Zoom. And that's one of the things what we like about this Friday show is we want people to come in and share their ideas and to provide an open forum in a safe environment, because let's face it, we're all socially distanced via Zoom. So file that one away.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. And you can actually understand what people are saying when they're not talking through a mask.
Exactly. Oh my God. And isn't that the truth? Have you ever picked up a coffee at Starbucks, by the way, and you just, you give them your name and they say, what's your name? What's your name? I said, you can't hear me because I got my damn mask on.
Right.
It's a little
If
frustrating.
you take it off, they tackle you.
Right. Exactly. Which is okay. I get that. I want to keep the mask on. In fact, now we want 2 masks, right? Or at least 2 or 3 layers of your mask.
Right. 2, because the other guy's not wearing his, so you have to double down.
Whatever it takes to keep us all healthy these days and safe. And man, it's just been a crazy 12 months, almost a year, right? I think it was almost a year to the day that the first case in the United States was just this past week, a year ago. It's been something none of us have had to go through before, and I certainly hope we never have to go through it again. I'm hoping that we're able to get these immunizations and vaccinations out as quickly as we possibly can. Well, guys, look, we've had a great forum of conversation. Dave O'Brien, great. Thank you so much. I know we've been after you for a while, and I so appreciate you taking the time out today to talk, and having Grant on a regular basis. I'm going to blame it all on David Rabinovitz, because he's the one who's really stepped up and has opened up the door to a lot of things for us. So I thank him as well. So you're welcome here any old time.
Thank you. I'm having me back. I'd love to come.
And Daniel Oa, thank you for breaking a story for us, because coming up after this live stream is our Weed Talk News. And one of the first things we talk about is we knew that the governor had put a deadline out for today to get this darn thing going in your state. So we're glad that we were able to break that. And I look forward to having you on a regular basis with us.
Definitely. Yeah. It's always fun to break news and break good news.
That's right. And it's all good news now. So again, please stay tuned to watch our weekly Weed Talk News with Rye Russell from Weed Buds Radio, our report from Deborah Borchardt, the Green Market Report, and of course, Phil Adams, Vote Pro podcast, and the DC Report. And next week, Solomon Israel from Canada will be back with us as well. So for David Rabinovitz, Dan French, who directs this whole thing, remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And we'll see you next week on Cannabis Chat Live.
Coming up on Weed Talk News, Weedmaps strikes gold with their IPO, or is it a silver spike? Massachusetts tries to do the right thing for social equity and pisses off their existing dispensaries. New Jersey lawmakers are on the governor's deadline now for launching their new law. And there's mold in Michigan weed, or at least some labs think there is. On Weed Talk News next.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Weed Talk News. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell, your main man from Weed Buds Radio.
Every week, Rye and I get together to talk about some of the biggest stories in the cannabis news space from the past week. And this week, we start with one of the biggest names and brands in the weed space. It's Weedmaps. Back on December 10th, which was just 6 weeks ago, Silver Spike Acquisition Corporation announced they were acquiring Weedmaps. Now, Silver Spike has seen a real spike in their valuation of Weedmaps. How does 21 times sales numbers now and 98 times EBITDA? Rye, you know what EBITDA stands for, don't you?
My investors sure hope so, Jimmy. Earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. EBITDA margins provide investors a snapshot of short-term operational efficiency. Weedmaps is seen as a great investment because its basic function is to tell you where you can find legal weed. Even though it is not touching any plants, it's telling you where you can get it. In fact, many investors liked the Weedmaps model because they were providing a service where they did not have to be licensed to share information about where you can get your legal cannabis.
And even though Weed Maps had a few issues, perhaps sharing some of the knowledge about that illegal market, they have certainly come back under the legal fold and are getting a lot of attention. Now, this is in direct contrast to the situation here in Massachusetts, where the Cannabis Control Commission introduced a new delivery license for social equity applicants last month. That induced a lawsuit from the Massachusetts Dispensary Association, which has since been dropped because some members of that dispensary association were actually getting faulty information from their own people. Now, of course, they have moved on and they have dropped that lawsuit. So, Rye, as you can imagine, needless to say, that has been a little controversial lately here in Massachusetts, but I do think now that they have dropped the lawsuit, they're trying now to figure out a way to perhaps work together with the social equity applicants and the delivery licenses. And isn't that the way things are supposed to work in an industry like this?
We would absolutely hope so, Jimmy. This is another example of why doing the right thing by social equity applicants can be in direct contrast to those who have put in millions to get their license to open a retail establishment. Big guys versus the little guys in cannabis. But now, Jimmy, we go to New York to the Green Market Report's Deborah Borchardt, who continues to watch the flow of public money in big weed. Deborah?
Thanks, guys. So many acquisitions happened this week. Air Strategies has taken their next steps in their Arizona strategy by signing a definitive agreement to buy Blue Camo in a deal that was first announced in November 2020. It is valued at $75 million. The Valens Company entered into an agreement with ATB Capital Markets to raise 35 million Canadian dollars, and then following that announcement, Valens said it was buying Life Food Technologies in a cash and stock deal valued at almost 25 million Canadian dollars. Grow Generation is at it again. The hydroponic chain has acquired Indoor Garden and Lighting. This is a 2-store chain of hydroponic stores in the Seattle and Tacoma, Washington area. GrowGen's going to consolidate its current Seattle operation into the new stores. This brings them up to 40 stores nationwide. And finally, Flower One completed an initial debt restructuring. They closed on $10 million of a non-brokered convertible debenture offering that could go up to $25 million, and they named a new CEO. And that's the big news this week. I'm Deborah Borchardt from the Green Market Report for Weed Talk News.
New Jersey's top law enforcement official has extended an order halting prosecutions for low-level marijuana offenses through the end of March, according to a memo from his office addressed to prosecutors across the state. In addition, New Jersey Governor Murphy has set a deadline for Friday for legislative leaders to get on the same page in regard to legalization and decriminalization. So this is one state we will be watching very closely.
Hopefully they will come up with some kind of compromise on the underage clause, which has held up this law for the last few weeks. Now, Rye, have you ever felt like you had to be kind of like a constitutional expert to understand how states and the federal government work?
Absolutely. It is stressful sometimes here, Jimmy.
I certainly understand that. And we in the United States of America are really not a true democracy, but rather a republic and a group of states that have similar but not exact ways of governing. However, when it comes to enacting cannabis legislation, it's never easy. Case in point, South Dakota. That state went 2 for 2 at the ballot box in November, passing both medicinal marijuana and adult use questions. However, lawyers and politicians are now getting involved with a lawsuit in order to change the will of the people. Now, we reported a few weeks ago that there is a constitutional challenge in South Dakota on whether those questions were properly phrased at the ballot box and whether a ballot question can even change the state constitution through a revision as opposed to an amendment. This all started when the superintendent for the South Dakota Highway Patrol brought suit at the direction of the governor there, Kristi Noem. They want a judge to throw out the results of the ballot question from November because of these procedural grounds. Now, so much for a true democracy where the will of the people is questioned when it doesn't fit the agenda of elected or appointed state officials. Speaking of democracy, let's check out what's going on with Washington, D.C., with Phil Adams with our D.C. report. He, of course, is from the Vote Pro podcast group. Phil?
Hi, this is Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast, here with the Weed Talk News DC report. Incoming President Joe Biden has sent out a government-wide memo calling on federal agencies to withdraw pending rules governing hemp and CBD. In compliance with the memo, the Food and Drug Administration has pulled the draft guidance on CBD enforcement that was submitted to the Trump White House for review last year. The action leaves the hemp and CBD industries without clear guidance for what may or may not warrant federal enforcement on companies marketing hemp-derived products. The Department of Agriculture rule on industrial hemp, set to take effect on March 22nd, is also under review by the administration. That rule, however, has not been put on hold. Whether a full-scale overhaul of the USDA rule is in the offing before that date remains to be seen. Production of hemp and hemp-derived products was made legal under the 2018 Farm Bill. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said in an interview this week that lawmakers are working to enact federal cannabis legalization this session. Specifically, Schumer said that a number of legalization proposals are being merged to fashion a bill that will end the federal prohibition on cannabis. Among the bills being looked at are the MORE Act, which passed the House last year, and Schumer's own proposal, the Marijuana Freedom and Opportunity Act. Both bills incorporate federal descheduling of cannabis, reinvesting cannabis tax revenues into communities, and expunging prior convictions of nonviolent cannabis offenders. Lawmakers are also looking at ways to prevent the FDA from imposing excessive new regulations on existing cannabis businesses. A new study shows a significant reduction in opioid-related deaths in areas of the U.S. where there are more cannabis dispensaries. The study, published this week in the British Medical Association's journal, the BMJ, comes as the Federal Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality is conducting its own review of the potential pain treatment benefits of cannabis. The BMJ study examined opioid mortality and legal cannabis availability in 23 states from 2014 to 2018. Researchers found that in areas where the number of legal cannabis dispensaries increased from 1 to 2, opioid-related fatalities dropped 17% overall. Where the number of dispensaries increased from 2 to 3, a further 8.5% decrease in opioid deaths was marked. The trend was strongest for deaths involving synthetic opioids, including fentanyl. That's the Weed Talk News DC report for this week. I'm Phil Adams from Vote Pro Podcast.
Solomon Israel is on assignment this week for MJ Biz Daily International, so his Canadian report will be back next week. But we do have one note from the Great White North, and that is that Circle K stores across the country will be carrying gift cards for the cannabis dispensary Fire and Flower, a well-known Canadian dispensary chain. These gift cards, they've been seen as one more major step towards normalization of our industry.
Now, one of the biggest reasons for cannabis advocates to legalize weed is that when you buy it from a legal licensed dispensary, you want to make sure that that cannabis has been tested. Well, now a group of testing labs in Michigan is calling foul on regulators because they have found mold in that state's weed. Amazingly, the Michigan Cannabis Industry Association is saying that there is no evidence that their product is tainted. So if you are in Michigan and you are in the market for cannabis, who are you going to believe? Now, the regulators or the testers? Right. Who would you believe, or would you just want to grow your own and then get it tested?
Well, Jimmy, many of our friends would say you do not truly have legal weed until you have the ability to grow it yourself.
There you go. Well, and that too is a little controversial as we go from state to state, because some states, like I believe New York and New Jersey, are still trying to figure out, do we allow home grow or not? What's your feeling about that?
Well, I'm here in the great state of Maine, Jimmy, and I truly believe that I like to grow my own carrots. I might want to grow my own weed.
There you go. And a lot of people in Maine love their water up there because they say that makes all the difference in the grow of the cannabis plant, right?
Exhibit A, Jimmy.
All right. Well, that'll do it for Weed Talk News for this week. I'm Jimmy Young from Pro Cannabis Media.
And I'm Rye Russell from Weed Buds Radio.
Remember, it's a whole new world of weed out there. Use it responsibly. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
Weed Talk and In the Weeds are two productions of Pro Cannabis Media supported by Revolutionary Clinics, one of the top medical cannabis dispensaries in the Massachusetts area, now with 3 locations in Greater Boston, 2 in Cambridge and 1 on Broadway in Somerville. Rev Clinics has a patient-first mission. They will customize your needs as a medical patient with the proper titration and combination of strains, flavors, and products. Rev Clinics, where the patient comes first. Pro Cannabis Media programming is available live and on demand on our Facebook page at Pro Canna Media, on Instagram at Pro Cannabis Media, on LinkedIn also at Pro Cannabis Media, on YouTube and YouTube Live on Pro Cannabis Media, Twitter at Pro Canna Media, and on twitch.tv/Pro Cannabis Media. So like, share, and subscribe to all of our content, newsletters, and shows live or on demand.
We are Pro Cannabis Media.